The blood on her sleeve had frozen solid by the time Rebecca Calloway stumbled into the trading post, and the three men warming their hands by the stove looked at her like she was already a ghost. She had walked 17 miles through snow that came up past her knees, dragging a broken leg behind her, and the only thing keeping her upright was the stubborn refusal to die alone in the Oregon wilderness like her father had 3 days prior. "Lord Almighty," breathed the oldest of the men, dropping his tin cup. "Girl, you should be dead." Rebecca braced herself against the doorframe, her vision swimming with black spots that threatened to pull her under. "Probably," she managed through cracked lips, "but I am not dead yet." The trading post owner, a grizzled man named Silas who had known her father, helped her to a chair near the fire. Her whole body shook violently as the warmth hit her frozen limbs. Silas examined her leg with practiced hands that had seen plenty of frontier injuries. "Broken clean through," he said grimly. "And this arm infected bad. You have got frostbite on both feet." He looked up at her with eyes that held no false comfort. "Miss Calloway, I will be straight with you. It is November. Winter is just starting and this one feels mean already. You need a doctor, proper medicine, a place to heal up. The nearest real doctor is in Boise, and that is a 4-day ride in good weather. In this snow might as well be the moon." "My father's claim," Rebecca said through chattering teeth. "I can go back. We had supplies stored." "Your daddy's claim is 20 miles north of here, and you barely made it 17 miles south. You go back up there alone, you will be dead before Christmas. That is just truth." Silas stood, wiping his hands on his apron. "You got any family, anyone who could take you in?" Rebecca shook her head. Her mother had died bringing her into this world 21 years ago, and her father had been the last of their line. They had come west from Missouri 2 years back, chasing the promise of gold in the Jordan Valley region of Oregon. Her father had found just enough color to keep them going, but never the big strike he had dreamed of. Then a week ago, he had gone out to check their sluice box and never came back. She had found him the next morning at the bottom of a ravine, his neck broken from a fall. "Nobody," she whispered. The three men by the stove exchanged glances. One of them, wearing a cattleman's coat, spoke up. "Silas, you know as well as I do she cannot winter here alone, not in her condition." "I know it, Dutch," Silas replied. He looked at Rebecca with something like pity. "Miss Calloway, I will help you best I can, but I have got to tell you true. The way you are hurt, the winter that is coming, the fact you have got no money for a doctor or medicine, you are not likely to see spring. That is just the hard truth of it. So I should just lay down and die." Rebecca heard the anger in her own voice, sharp and bright against the pain that radiated from every part of her body. "I am saying you should prepare yourself, is all." The cattleman named Dutch cleared his throat. "There might be one option." He paused, as if weighing his words. "Quincy Ashford has been looking to hire someone to help out at his ranch this winter. His last hand quit before the snow hit. It is hard work, but he would provide room and board, and Quincy knows enough doctoring to handle most injuries. He learned from his mother, who was a proper nurse back in St. Louis." Silas frowned. "Dutch, look at her. She cannot work a ranch. She can barely stand. Maybe Quincy could use help with other things. Cooking, mending, keeping house. His place is isolated, but it is solid. Good shelter, plenty of food put by. Better than freezing to death alone, anyway." Rebecca tried to focus on the conversation, but the warmth of the fire was making her drowsy, and the pain in her leg had become a dull roar that filled her whole world. "Where is this ranch?" "About 8 miles west of here, up in the foothills. Quincy runs cattle, breeds horses too. Good man, honest. Keeps to himself mostly since his wife passed some years back." Dutch looked at Silas. "You know I am right. It is her best chance." Silas rubbed his jaw. I suppose it could not hurt to ask. Quincy comes into town for supplies every 2 weeks. Should be here tomorrow or the day after if the weather holds. But the weather did not hold. By nightfall, a blizzard had rolled in from the north, howling like something alive and angry. Rebecca lay on a cot in the back room of the trading post, drifting in and out of fevered dreams. Silas's wife, Martha, tended her as best she could, but the infection in her arm was spreading, dark red lines creeping up toward her shoulder. The broken leg had swollen to twice its normal size. "She is burning up," Martha said to her husband on the second night of the storm. Rebecca could hear them through the thin wall, their voices low and worried. "That infection is getting worse. If we do not get her to a doctor soon, we will be digging a grave come spring thaw. Cannot get to Boise in this weather. Cannot even get word to Quincy. We are snowed in solid. Then that poor girl is going to die, and there is nothing we can do about it." Rebecca wanted to rage against those words, to stand up and prove them wrong, but she could not even lift her head. The fever pulled her down into darkness where her father waited, his neck twisted at an impossible angle, saying over and over, "I am sorry, Becca. I am so sorry I left you alone." She woke to the sound of stamping feet and a deep voice cutting through the wind. "Got here soon as I could. Storm broke for a bit, figured I had better make the ride while I was able. Quincy, thank God," Silas said. "We were not expecting you in this weather. Felt uneasy. Sometimes you just know when something is wrong." The voice was closer now, just outside her door. "Dutch sent word by his boy before the storm hit. Said you had someone who needed help." Martha pushed open the door, lamplight spilling across the floor. "She is in here, Mr. Ashford. I will warn you, she is in a bad way." The man who entered was tall enough to duck under the door frame, with broad shoulders and work-worn hands. He was maybe 28 or 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of weathered wood. He knelt beside Rebecca's cot with the careful movements of someone used to handling injured animals. "Miss Calloway," he said, and his voice was gentler than she expected. "My name is Quincy Ashford. I hear you have had some rough luck. May I examine your injuries?" Rebecca nodded, too weak to do much else. His hands were sure and efficient as he unwrapped the makeshift bandages on her arm, his expression darkening as he saw the infection. He checked her leg, her frostbitten feet, listened to her labored breathing. "How long has she been fevered?" He asked Martha. 2 days solid, getting worse." Quincy was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight, then he stood. "I need to get her to my ranch. I've got proper supplies there, medicine my mother left, tools for setting bones. Here she will die, that is certain." "Quincy, it is 8 miles in a blizzard," Silas protested. "You will kill her trying to move her. She is dying right now. At least my way she has got a fighting chance." He looked down at Rebecca, his expression serious. "Miss Calloway, I will be straight with you. The ride is going to hurt like hell. You might not make it, but if you stay here, you definitely will not make it. Your choice." Rebecca met his eyes. They were honest eyes, steady and clear. "I choose the fighting chance." Quincy nodded once, decisive. "Then let us get you wrapped up warm." The next hour was a blur of pain and preparation. Quincy had brought a small sleigh pulled by 2 sturdy horses, meant for hauling supplies but padded now with blankets and furs. He wrapped Rebecca in so many layers she could barely move, then lifted her with surprising gentleness and placed her in the sleigh. "I will get you there," he said, tucking a final fur around her. "I promise you that." The journey was every bit as terrible as he had warned. The wind cut like knives, and every bump sent fresh agony shooting through her broken leg. But Quincy kept his word, guiding the horses with steady confidence through the whiteout conditions, never once losing his way. He talked to her the whole time, his voice a lifeline in the howling dark. Stay awake, Rebecca. Tell me about Missouri. What part are you from? She tried to answer, her words slurring. Cape Girardeau on the river. I know it. Passed through once on my way west. Pretty country, you miss it. Sometimes. Father said Oregon would be better, more opportunity. Your father was a dreamer then. That is not a bad thing. This country was built by dreamers. He urged the horses on, his own face raw from the cold. We are almost there. Another mile. You stay with me now. When they finally reached the ranch, Rebecca was only half conscious. She had impressions of a solid log house, a barn with warm light spilling from its doors, the smell of wood smoke and horses. Quincy carried her inside and laid her on a real bed with a feather mattress, then immediately set to work with the focused intensity of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. He heated water, cleaned the infection with something that burned like fire, packed it with a paste that smelled of herbs and honey. He set her broken leg properly, binding it with splints he carved right there from straight pine wood. He treated her frostbite, massaged circulation back into her frozen feet. All through the night he worked, and when the fever finally broke just before dawn, Rebecca opened her eyes to find him slumped in a chair beside her bed, exhausted but watchful. You made it through, he said simply. Rest now. You are safe here. The days that followed were a strange mixture of pain and healing. Quincy tended her injuries with patient skill, changing bandages, administering medicines, making sure she ate even when she had no appetite. He never complained about the extra work, never made her feel like a burden. His ranch was indeed isolated, with the nearest neighbor miles away, but it was clean and well kept, with a warmth that went beyond the fire always burning in the hearth. My mother taught me about healing, he explained one afternoon as he checked the progress of her leg. She was a nurse in the war, saw all kinds of injuries, said knowing how to set bones and treat infection was more valuable out west than knowing how to shoot. I think she was right. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Died 5 years back, pneumonia. My father went a year after that, just lost the will, I think. They had been together since they were 15 years old. Could not imagine life without her. He rewrapped the bandage carefully. This is healing well. You might walk with a limp, but you will walk. That is more than Silas thought would happen. Rebecca watched him work, noticing details she had been too feverish to see before. The careful way his hands moved, never rough despite their size. The concentration in his eyes. The lock of dark hair that fell across his forehead when he bent over his work. Why did you help me? She asked quietly. You did not know me. I could not pay you. You risked your life in that storm. Quincy paused, considering the question. I guess because someone needed help and I could give it. Does there need to be more reason than that? Most people would say yes. Then most people and I disagree. He met her eyes. Besides, Dutch was right. I could use help around here. Winter is long and lonely. Once you are healed up, if you want to stay, there is plenty of work. Cooking, mending, tending the chickens and such. Nothing that requires being on your feet all day. I can pay you fair wages, and come spring, if you want to leave, I will take you wherever you want to go. But you have got a place here as long as you need it, no strings attached. It was the kindest offer anyone had ever made her. I would like that, Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. I would like that very much. The winter deepened, and with it came a slow settling into routine. As Rebecca healed, she began taking over the household tasks that Quincy had been managing himself. She discovered that he was a terrible cook, living mostly on jerky and beans, and took quiet satisfaction in preparing proper meals. She mended his clothes, which were all worn thin and poorly patched. She organized the cluttered kitchen, cleaned the windows, brought small touches of order and comfort to the house. Quincy, for his part, proved to be surprisingly good company. He was not much of a talker, but when he did speak, it was with a dry humor that caught her off guard. He read voraciously, his shelves filled with books on everything from cattle breeding to Shakespeare. On long evenings, they would sit by the fire, and he would read aloud while she sewed, his deep voice turning the words into something almost musical. "You are good at that," she said one night as he finished a passage from Twain. "My wife used to say the same thing." He closed the book, a distant look in his eyes. "Catherine. She died in childbirth 6 years ago, the baby too, a son. I named him Thomas after my father, even though he only lived an hour. I am so sorry. It is the way of things sometimes. Frontier life is hard. Catherine knew it. We both did, but knowing it does not make it easier." He set the book aside. "I have not talked about them much since. Most people do not know what to say." "I do not either," Rebecca admitted, "but I will listen if you want to talk about them." And he did, slowly at first, then with more ease. He told her about Catherine, who had been a blacksmith's daughter from Boise, strong and laughing and unafraid of hard work. He told her about their dreams of building the ranch into something substantial, a legacy for children who never came. He told her about the loneliness that had settled over him after their deaths, how the ranch had become both a comfort and a prison. In turn, Rebecca found herself talking about her own losses. Her mother, whom she had never known but always mourned. Her father, who had loved her fiercely but had never quite recovered from his wife's death, always chasing the next dream, the next claim, the next chance to strike it rich. The guilt she carried for being the reason her mother died. "That is a foolish guilt," Quincy said firmly. "You did not choose to be born, and your mother chose to have you. Whatever happened, it was not your doing. My father never said it outright, but I could see it in his eyes sometimes. He loved me, but he looked at me and saw what he had lost. Then he was a fool, and I say that knowing he is dead and you loved him. Because when I look at you, I see someone who walked 17 miles on a broken leg through a blizzard rather than give up. I see someone who faced down death and spat in its eye. That is what your mother gave you. That is the legacy you carry. Not guilt. Never guilt." His words broke something open inside her, and she wept for the first time since her father died. Quincy let her cry, sitting quiet and steady nearby, a solid presence in the storm of her grief. When the tears finally subsided, he handed her a clean handkerchief and asked if she wanted tea. "Yes," she said, laughing a little through the last of her tears. Yes, tea would be good. December turned to January and the snow piled higher. Some mornings they could not even open the front door, and Quincy had to climb out a window to dig them free. But inside the house, a different kind of warmth was growing. Rebecca found herself watching Quincy as he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders, the competence in his hands. She liked the way he talked to his horses, gentle and patient. She liked his quiet laugh when something amused him. She liked the way he looked at her sometimes, as if seeing past the broken body to the person inside. For his part, Quincy was discovering that having Rebecca in his house had changed everything. The meals were better, yes, and the house was cleaner, but it was more than that. There was light in the rooms again. There was laughter. When he came in from feeding the stock on a bitter cold morning, there was someone waiting who cared whether he was warm enough, whether he needed coffee, whether the frostbite on his ears was getting worse. He had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care. "You are staring," Rebecca said one evening, catching him looking at her across the fire. "Apologies, I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how different this winter is from the last 5. How much easier it is with you here." She set down her sewing, her cheeks coloring slightly. "You saved my life, Quincy. The least I could do is make your coffee. It is more than that, and you know it." He leaned forward, his expression serious. Rebecca, I want you to know that when I said there were no strings attached to you staying here, I meant it. You do not owe me anything. Not gratitude, not service, not anything beyond what you choose to give freely. You understand that? I do. Good, because I need you to understand that before I say what I am about to say. He took a breath. I care about you, more than I should, probably. More than is wise for an employer to care about someone in his employ. And if those feelings make you uncomfortable, or if you do not share them, then we can forget I ever said anything and go on as we have been. But I needed to be honest with you. You deserve honesty. Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must surely hear it. What if I said I cared about you too, more than is wise for someone in my position? Then I would say we are both fools. His smile was soft, tentative. But maybe being fools together is not so bad. She stood, her legs still stiff but healing, and crossed to where he sat. He rose to meet her, tall and solid and safe. When he took her hands in his, they were warm and calloused and gentle. I have not done this in a long time, he said quietly. I might not be very good at it anymore. Neither have I. We will figure it out together. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she had imagined a kiss would be. It was soft and questioning, full of tenderness and promise. His arms came around her carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. She leaned into his warmth, into his strength, and felt something that had been frozen inside her for a very long time finally begin to thaw. They courted properly after that, even though they were living in the same house. Quincy was a stickler for propriety, insisting that they maintain separate bedrooms and that he never compromise her reputation, isolated though they were. He brought her small gifts from his rides around the property. A pretty stone from the creek, a hawk feather found in the snow, a cluster of frozen berries that looked like jewels. Rebecca had never been courted before, her father's constant moving making it impossible to form attachments. She was surprised to discover that she liked it, liked the small rituals of romance. The way Quincy held her chair at meals. The way he asked permission before kissing her. The way he listened when she talked, really listened as if her thoughts and opinions mattered. "Tell me about your dreams," he said one afternoon as they sat on the porch, watching the winter sun sparkle on the snow. "What did you want before your father died? What were you working toward?" Rebecca considered the question. "I wanted a home, I think, not a claim or a camp or a temporary place. A real home, somewhere I could put down roots, grow a garden, know my neighbors' names. My father was always moving, always chasing the next strike. I got tired of never staying anywhere long enough to matter." "You matter here," Quincy said quietly. "You know that, right?" "I am beginning to." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "What about now?" "What do you want now?" "This," she said simply. "I want this." By February, the worst of the winter had passed. The snow still lay thick on the ground, but the storms came less frequently, and there were days when the sun shone bright and almost warm. Rebecca's leg had healed enough that she could walk without a pronounced limp, though it still ached in cold weather. Her arm had healed cleanly, leaving only a thin scar as reminder of how close she had come to losing it. Quincy taught her to ride, starting with the gentlest mare in his string. Rebecca had ridden before, but never well, and never for pleasure. Under Quincy's patient instruction, she learned to move with the horse, to anticipate its movements, to communicate through subtle shifts of weight and pressure. "You are a natural," he said, watching her canter across the snow-covered pasture. "Catherine used to ride like that, like she and the horse were thinking the same thoughts." It was the first time he had mentioned his wife in connection with Rebecca, and she took it as the compliment it was meant to be. "Will you tell me more about her, about your life before?" They sat on a fallen log, the horses grazing nearby, and Quincy talked about the early days of the ranch. How he and Catherine had started with nothing but a land claim and a dream. How they had built the house themselves, log by log. How Catherine had been the one who insisted on the wide porch and the big windows, saying she would not live in a dark cave no matter how practical it might be. She would have liked you, he said. She had strong opinions about people and she did not suffer fools, but she would have seen your strength right away. She valued strength above almost everything. Do you think she would mind? You and me. Quincy was quiet for a long moment. I think she would want me to be happy. And Rebecca, you make me happy. Happier than I have been in longer than I can remember. In March, the thaw began in earnest. The creek ran high and fast with snowmelt, and the first brave buds appeared on the willows. Quincy took Rebecca with him on his rounds, checking on the cattle that had weathered the winter, looking for newborn calves. The ranch spread across a wide valley, backed by pine-covered hills, and from the high pastures they could see for miles. "This is beautiful country," Rebecca said, standing at the fence and looking out over the land. "I never really saw it before last autumn. I was too focused on survival to notice beauty." "It gets in your blood," Quincy agreed. "The open space, the clean air. I could never go back east now." "This is home." "For me too," she said, and realized it was true. Somewhere over the long winter, this place had become home in a way nowhere else ever had. Not because of the land, though the land was lovely, but because of the man standing beside her. As the weather warmed, neighbors began to emerge from their winter isolation. Dutch, the cattleman who had first suggested Rebecca stay with Quincy, rode out to check on them. His eyebrows rose at seeing Rebecca healthy and smiling, clearly at home on the ranch. "Well now," he said, accepting coffee at the kitchen table. "Looks like the winter treated you both just fine. Silas said to tell you he is pleased you made it through, Miss Calloway. He was not certain you would." "Neither was I," Rebecca admitted. "Quincy saved my life." "Quincy always was good at saving things. Horses, cattle, people. Man cannot help himself." Dutch grinned. "So what are your plans now? Spring is here, roads will be clear soon. You heading on to somewhere else?" Rebecca glanced at Quincy, who was watching her with those steady brown eyes. "Actually, I was thinking I might stay, if the offer is still open." "The offer is definitely still open," Quincy said, "for as long as you want." Dutch looked between them, a knowing smile spreading across his weathered face. "Well, good. About time you had someone to share this place with, Quincy. Gets too quiet. A man starts talking to his horses like they are people." After Dutch left, Quincy found Rebecca in the garden plot behind the house, turning over the dark earth in preparation for planting. "You meant that, about staying." "I did, unless you were just being polite earlier." "I was not being polite." He knelt beside her, taking the trowel from her hands and setting it aside. "Rebecca, I want you to stay forever. I want you to marry me. I want to build a life with you here on this land. I want to give you the home you dreamed about, the roots you never had. I want to see every spring with you and every summer and fall and winter after. I want it all." "That is a lot of wanting," she said, but her smile was radiant. "I know. And I know it is fast, maybe too fast. We have only known each other 4 months, but I also know that I love you. I know that I wake up every morning grateful you are here. I know that when I think about the future, you are in every part of it. So if that makes me a fool, then I am a fool. But I am a fool who is asking you to marry him. What do you say?" Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I say yes. Yes to all of it. To marriage and to forever and to building a life together." "Yes." Quincy swept her up in his arms, spinning her around in the garden, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and the kiss tasted of spring and new beginnings and promises kept. They were married in early April by a circuit preacher who made his rounds through the Jordan Valley settlements. It was a small ceremony, attended by Dutch and his family, Silas and Martha from the trading post, and a handful of other neighbors. Rebecca wore a simple dress of pale blue calico that she had sewn herself, and Quincy wore his best suit, which still smelled faintly of cedar from the trunk where it had been stored. "I never thought I would do this again," he admitted as they waited for the preacher to arrive. "After Catherine died, I thought that part of my life was over." "Are you having second thoughts?" "Not even for a second. I am just grateful. Grateful that I got a second chance. That you got a second chance. That we found each other in the middle of a blizzard and a dying season." The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed Rebecca with a tenderness that made Martha dab at her eyes with her handkerchief. They celebrated with a meal at the ranch. Everyone crowded around the big table, sharing food and stories and laughter. "To Rebecca and Quincy," Dutch said, raising his glass. "May they have many years of happiness, many children, and may they never have to face another winter like the last one." "I do not know," Quincy said, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "That winter brought me the greatest blessing of my life. I would live through 100 like it for this." As spring turned to summer, Rebecca settled fully into her new life as Quincy's wife. She planted an extensive garden, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of work that kept them fed and clothed and comfortable. She helped Quincy with the horses, discovering a talent for gentling the young colts. "You have got a good touch," Quincy said, watching her work with a flighty 2-year-old. "Patient and firm at the same time. That is rare." "I learned from the best," she said, leaning into him when he came to stand beside her at the fence. At night, in the bedroom they now shared, they learned each other's bodies with the same patience and care they brought to everything else. Quincy was a considerate lover, attentive to Rebecca's needs and desires. Rebecca, who had come to marriage innocent, discovered depths of passion she had not known she possessed. They fit together like two pieces of a puzzle, complementing each other's strengths and weaknesses. By July, Rebecca knew she was pregnant. She waited to tell Quincy until she was certain, then chose her moment carefully. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the hills, and she simply took his hand and placed it on her still, flat belly. "There is a baby growing in there," she said softly. "Our baby." Quincy went very still. For a long moment he did not speak, and Rebecca felt a flutter of worry. Then she saw the tears tracking down his cheeks, and she understood. "I thought I would never have this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "After losing Thomas and Catherine, I thought fatherhood was not meant for me. It is meant for you. You are going to be a wonderful father." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am a little scared, I will admit. My mother died birthing me, and you're Catherine. What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing is going to go wrong." He said it with such fierce certainty that she almost believed him. "We are going to do everything right. I am going to take you to Boise to see a real doctor. We are going to make sure you have the best care. And when the time comes, I am going to be right there with you. You are not going through this alone." True to his word, Quincy took Rebecca to Boise in August, making the journey slowly and carefully. The doctor there, a competent woman named Sarah Fletcher, examined Rebecca thoroughly and pronounced her healthy and strong. "Your pelvis is well shaped for childbirth," she said matter-of-factly. "And you are in excellent physical condition. I see no reason to anticipate complications. But I would recommend you stay in town for the last month before the baby is due, just to be safe. First babies can be unpredictable." They made arrangements to stay with Dutch's sister, who lived in Boise and ran a boarding house. Quincy hated being away from the ranch, but he hated the thought of risking Rebecca more. So in late January of 1884, they moved into town, settling into a comfortable routine of waiting. The baby came on a cold February morning, exactly a year after Quincy and Rebecca had declared their love for each other. The labor was long and difficult, but Rebecca was strong, and Dr. Fletcher was skilled. Quincy stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced, Dr. Fletcher held him up with a satisfied smile. A boy. A healthy, strong boy. Quincy looked at his son with wonder, touching one tiny fist with his finger. The baby's hand closed around it instinctively, holding tight. "Hello, son. Welcome to the world." They named him Thomas after Quincy's father and his first son who had not lived. Rebecca worried at first that the name would bring pain, but Quincy was adamant. "It is a good name, a strong name, and maybe this is a way of honoring both of them, my father and my first boy. This Thomas will have the life they did not get to live." Thomas Ashford was indeed strong, thriving from the start. He nursed well and slept well and rarely cried without good reason. When they brought him home to the ranch in March, as the snow was melting and the first green shoots were appearing, it felt like the completion of something that had started the year before. "A full circle," Rebecca said, standing on the porch with the baby in her arms, looking out at the land coming back to life. "Last spring I was barely alive. This spring I have everything I ever wanted." Quincy wrapped his arms around both of them. "We both do. Thank you for that. For being stubborn enough to survive that winter. For giving me a second chance at happiness. Thank you for making sure I lived to see this spring, and all the springs after. The years that followed were good ones, full of the kind of simple happiness that comes from hard work and mutual love." The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Quincy's horses gained a reputation for quality, and buyers came from as far as Portland to purchase his stock. Rebecca's garden became famous in Jordan Valley, and she traded vegetables and preserves for goods they could not produce themselves. Thomas grew into a sturdy, cheerful child with his father's brown eyes and his mother's determination. When he was 2, he got a sister, whom they named Catherine Rose, after Quincy's first wife and Rebecca's middle name. 2 years after that came another boy, Samuel, and then 3 years later, a final daughter, Martha, named for the trading post woman who had first tended Rebecca's injuries. The children grew up wild and happy on the ranch, learning to ride before they could properly walk, helping with chores as soon as they were able. Quincy was a patient, loving father and Rebecca a firm but nurturing mother. Together they built the kind of family neither of them had truly had growing up. Sometimes visitors would ask Rebecca about her early days in Oregon, about the winter she nearly died. She would tell the story plainly, without embellishment, but always ending the same way. "They told me I would not make it through that winter. The men at the trading post, they looked at me like I was already dead, and maybe I should have been. By all rights, I should have frozen to death or died from infection or just given up. But Quincy would not let that happen. He rode through a blizzard to get me, tended my injuries, gave me a reason to fight, and he has been making sure I see every spring since. Best decision I ever made," Quincy would add, pulling her close. "Bringing you home that night. Second best," Rebecca would correct with a smile. The best was asking me to stay forever. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quincy surprised Rebecca with a gift. He led her out to the garden, where a new structure stood. It was a gazebo, built from smooth pine logs and roofed with cedar shakes, with a bench inside that faced west toward the hills. "I thought you might like a place to sit and watch the sunset," he said. "Somewhere pretty just for you." Rebecca walked inside, running her hands over the smooth wood. On the bench was a cushion she recognized as being made from one of Catherine's quilts, carefully preserved all these years. She looked at Quincy questioningly. "Catherine would want it used," he said. "Would want it to be part of our life. She was never the jealous type. She would be happy that something she made is still bringing comfort." Rebecca sat on the bench, and Quincy joined her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The children's laughter drifted from the house, where Martha was watching them so their parents could have this time alone. "You ever think about that first winter?" Rebecca asked. "About how close it was?" "Every day," Quincy admitted. "Every single day I am grateful that Dutch suggested you might stay with me, that I rode out in that storm, that you were strong enough to hold on until I could get you help. Any one of those things goes differently, and we do not have this life. We do not have our children, our home, our love. It all hinged on chance and stubborn refusal to give up." "Not just chance," Rebecca said. "It hinged on a good man who saw someone in need and helped without asking for anything in return. I got everything in return. I got you." As the years passed, the story of how Quincy and Rebecca met became something of a legend in Jordan Valley. People would point out the couple at church socials or town gatherings, the rancher and his wife who had found love in the teeth of a killing winter. Young couples would ask them for advice, and Quincy and Rebecca would always say the same thing. "Choose each other every day," Rebecca would say. "Not just once, not just at a wedding. Every single day, wake up and choose to love that person, to work with them, to build something together. And never take for granted the time you have," Quincy would add. "Life is uncertain, especially out here. Tomorrow is not promised, so make today count." By the time they celebrated their 20th anniversary, Quincy had gray in his hair and Rebecca had lines around her eyes. But they still looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt that first spring, when the snow was melting and everything seemed possible. Thomas, grown into a man of 18, had started courting a neighbor girl and talking about building his own house on the far corner of the ranch. Catherine Rose, 16 and beautiful, helped her mother run the household with quiet competence. Samuel, 14, had inherited his father's way with horses and spent every spare moment in the barn. Little Martha, now 11, was wild and free and utterly fearless. "We did good," Rebecca said to Quincy one evening as they sat in the gazebo, watching their children at their various tasks. "We built something real and lasting." "We did," Quincy agreed. "Though I think you deserve most of the credit. You are the heart of this family. And you are the foundation, strong and steady and reliable." She took his hand as she had done countless times over the years. "I love you, Quincy Ashford. I loved you when you carried me out of that blizzard, and I love you now, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." "That is the second best thing I have ever heard you say." "What was the first?" "When you said yes to marrying me. That was the moment I knew everything was going to be all right." They sat in the gathering dusk, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a love that had weathered every storm. Around them, the ranch bustled with life. The horses whinnied in the pasture. The cattle lowed in the distance. The chickens settled into their roost for the night. Inside the house, lamplight glowed warm and golden. This was what Rebecca had dreamed of all those years ago when she stumbled into the trading post more dead than alive. A home. A family. Roots that went deep into the good earth. Love that sustained and strengthened and endured. She had been told she would not make it through winter. But she had, and every spring since then had been sweeter for the knowledge of how close she had come to missing it all. Every bud that swelled on the fruit trees, every calf that was born, every sunrise that painted the hills in rose and gold, all of it was precious because she understood how easily it could have been lost. But she had not lost it. She had fought for it, and Quincy had fought for her, and together they had built something beautiful and enduring. They had built a life worth living, a love worth celebrating, a family worth cherishing. As the years continued to roll by, the Ashford Ranch became a cornerstone of the Jordan Valley community. Quincy served on the school board and helped organize the annual cattle drive. Rebecca taught Sunday school and tended the sick when Dr. Fletcher could not make it out from Boise. Their home was always open, their table always welcoming. When Thomas married his sweetheart in the spring of 1894, the whole valley turned out for the celebration. The ceremony was held at the ranch, in the meadow where Rebecca had first learned to ride, with the mountains as backdrop. Rebecca cried as she watched her son take his vows, remembering her own wedding day and how uncertain she had felt about the future. "No need for tears," Quincy whispered, handing her his handkerchief. "This is a happy day. These are happy tears. I am just overwhelmed by how blessed we are. How much we have. I know. I feel it too." Catherine Rose married 2 years later, and Samuel began seriously courting the schoolteacher from town. Only Martha remained unmarried, declaring loudly that she had no interest in men and planned to become a horse trainer like her father. "You will change your mind," Catherine teased her. "I will not," Martha insisted. "I am going to be like Aunt Sarah in Boise, independent and free." Rebecca shared a smile with Quincy. "Let her be young and certain, time enough for her to figure out what she really wants." As Quincy and Rebecca entered their 50s, they began gradually turning over more of the ranch operations to Thomas, who had his father's skill and his mother's head for business. It was not retirement exactly. They still worked every day, still kept their hands busy and their minds sharp. But there was more time now for sitting on the porch in the evening, for taking long rides through the hills, for simply being together. "You have any regrets?" Rebecca asked one summer evening as they watched the sunset from their gazebo. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Quincy thought about it carefully before answering. "I regret the years I spent alone after Catherine died, not because I should have remarried sooner, but because I let grief turn me into a hermit. I stopped living for a while there, but other than that, no. I would not change a single thing about our life together. Not even the hard parts. The years when money was tight, or when Samuel broke his arm and we thought we might lose him to infection, or when the drought almost ruined us. Not even those. The hard parts made us stronger. They taught us what we were capable of surviving together." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern of her knuckles. "What about you? Any regrets?" "Only that I waited so long to find you. But then again, maybe the timing was exactly right. Maybe we both needed to go through what we went through to be ready for each other." "I think you might be right about that." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sky fade from blue to purple to black, the stars emerging one by one. Somewhere an owl called, and the night breeze carried the scent of pine and sage. It was a moment of perfect peace, and Rebecca committed it to memory, knowing these moments were the true treasure of a life well lived. Martha surprised everyone by falling in love at 20 with a young veterinarian who came through Jordan Valley on his way to Portland. She married him in a whirlwind ceremony and moved to the city, though she came home often and always with stories of her adventures. "I never thought our wild one would settle down," Quincy admitted after seeing her off on yet another visit. "She has not settled so much as found someone who matches her energy," Rebecca corrected. "That boy can keep up with her, and that is saying something." With all their children grown and married, the ranch house felt too quiet. But it was not an unhappy quiet. It was peaceful, restful. Quincy and Rebecca had time now for projects they had put off for years. They built an addition onto the house, a sunroom where Rebecca could sit and sew in the winter. They expanded the garden, adding a whole section just for flowers. They took a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation in 30 years. But they always came back to the ranch, to the land that had brought them together and sustained them through everything. This was home in a way nowhere else could ever be. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Thomas and his wife had 4 children of their own now. Catherine Rose had 3. Samuel had 2, with another on the way. Even Martha, married only 5 years, had a toddler son who was already showing signs of being as wild as his mother. The house and grounds were filled with laughter and chaos and love. Quincy stood on the porch, watching his family, and felt a profound sense of contentment. "Quite a legacy," Dutch said, coming to stand beside him. The old cattleman was stooped now, his hair white, but his eyes were still sharp. "Remember when I suggested you take in that half-frozen girl all those years ago? Best advice anyone ever gave me," Quincy said. "I knew you two would be good for each other. Saw it right away. You needed someone to bring you back to life, and she needed someone to keep her alive." Worked out perfectly. Rebecca joined them, slipping her hand into Quincy's. "What are you 2 old men gossiping about? Just remembering how this all started," Dutch said with a grin. "How a stubborn woman and a lonely cowboy found each other in a blizzard. We were lucky," Rebecca said simply. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Quincy corrected. "You were strong and I was determined, and we both refused to give up. That is not luck, that is will." "Maybe a little bit of both," Rebecca conceded. She looked out at their gathered family, at the children playing tag in the yard, at the adults talking and laughing at the tables laden with food. "However it happened, I am grateful for every single day." As evening fell, Thomas called for everyone's attention. "I would like to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass. "To my parents, Quincy and Rebecca Ashford. 30 years ago today they made promises to each other. Promises to love, to honor, to cherish, and they have kept those promises every single day since. They have built this ranch, this family, this legacy. They have shown us all what true partnership looks like. They have taught us about perseverance and dedication and love that endures. So here is to 30 more years, and to the example they have set for all of us." "To Mom and Dad," Catherine Rose added, her voice thick with emotion. "To the best parents anyone could ask for," Samuel continued. "To Grandma and Grandpa," the grandchildren chorused. Everyone drank, and then the party continued into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Quincy and Rebecca danced together as they had at their wedding, moving with the ease of long practice. She fit against him perfectly, as she always had. 30 years, she marveled. It has gone so fast. And so slow all at once, Quincy agreed. "Sometimes I still feel like that young man riding through a blizzard, terrified I would not get to you in time. Other times it feels like we have always been together, like there was never a time when you were not part of my life. I know exactly what you mean. It is strange, is it not? How time can feel so elastic. Not strange, just life, our life together." When the party finally wound down and the last guests had left, Quincy and Rebecca walked out to the gazebo. It had become their ritual over the years, this ending of the day in quiet contemplation. The gazebo had weathered and aged gracefully, the wood taking on a silvery patina. The cushion from Catherine's quilt had been replaced several times, but pieces of the original were still there, carefully preserved and incorporated into each new version. "You ever think about her?" Rebecca asked, as she sometimes did. "Your first Catherine, sometimes, not with pain anymore, just with fondness. She was a good woman and she deserved more years than she got, but I think she would be happy about how things turned out. She was never the type to hold grudges or want me to mourn forever. I wish I could have known her. I wish you could have too. You would have been friends, I think. She would have admired your strength and you would have appreciated her spirit. Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, with smoke and leather and something indefinably Quincy. I love you. I do not say it enough, but I love you with everything I am. You say it every day, even when you do not use words. I see it in the way you smile at me over breakfast, in the way you touch my hand in passing, in the way you have built this life with me. He kissed the top of her head. And I love you just as much. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca Ashford, the absolute best thing. They sat in the gazebo until the moon rose, full and bright, casting silver light across the ranch. From the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. In the distance, a coyote sang its lonely song. The air smelled of sage and sweet grass and summer. This was their world, the one they had built together from nothing but determination and love. It was not a perfect world. There had been struggles and sorrows along the way. Years when the cattle died from disease, when crops failed, when money was desperately tight. There had been illnesses and injuries and losses. But through it all, they had each other. That had been the constant, the foundation everything else was built upon. When times were hard, they leaned on each other. When times were good, they celebrated together. And always, always, they chose each other. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Rebecca thought about that desperate girl who had stumbled into the trading post so many years ago. That girl who had been told she would not survive the winter, who had been looked at as if she were already dead. What would she think if she could see this life? This beautiful, rich, full life that had grown from the seeds planted in that dark season. She would probably not believe it was possible, Rebecca thought. She would think it was a dream, too good to be true. But it was real, all of it. Every joyful moment, every quiet evening, every shared laugh and shed tear. Real and earned and cherished. What are you thinking about? Quincy asked as they paused on the porch, about how far we have come, about how much has changed since that first winter. Everything has changed, Quincy agreed. And nothing has. We are still just two people who refuse to give up, who keep choosing each other every single day. May we always keep choosing each other. We will, he promised. Every day for as long as we both shall live. That is what I vowed 30 years ago, and it is what I vow now. You and me, Rebecca, until the very end. They went inside to the house they had built together, the home that had sheltered their love and raised their children and welcomed their grandchildren. The house that had started as a lonely bachelor's cabin and had been transformed into something warm and alive and full of hope. In the bedroom, Quincy helped Rebecca with the buttons on her dress, his fingers still nimble despite the arthritis that plagued them both. She turned in his arms and kissed him, and the kiss was sweet with the knowledge of all the years behind them and whatever years lay ahead. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "For what? For riding out in that blizzard, for not giving up on me, for making sure I saw every spring after that terrible winter. Thank you for being worth saving, for giving me a reason to live again. For loving me even when I was just a broken-down cowboy with more grief than good sense. You were never broken down, you were just wounded. There is a difference. You healed me, Rebecca. As surely as I healed your body, you healed my heart." They made love slowly, gently, with the ease of long familiarity and the passion of enduring devotion. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Rebecca's head on Quincy's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I hope we have many more years," she said quietly. "But if we do not, if tomorrow is our last day, I want you to know I regret nothing. This life with you has been everything I could have wanted and more. We will have many more years, Quincy said firmly. I am not done with you yet, woman. We have got grandchildren to spoil and crops to plant and cattle to raise. We have got sunsets to watch and stories to tell. We are going to keep going until we are both ancient and gray and our children have to help us up the porch steps. Rebecca laughed softly. That sounds perfect. And it was perfect, the years that followed. Not perfect in the sense of being easy or without challenge, but perfect in the sense of being exactly right for them. They grew old together, gradually and gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. When Quincy's hands became too stiff to work with the horses the way he once had, Rebecca was there to help, her own hands still capable and sure. When Rebecca's eyes grew dim, and she could no longer sew the fine stitches she had once prided herself on, Quincy read to her every evening, his voice never wavering. They took care of each other, as they always had. Through the small indignities of aging, through the aches and pains and limitations, they remained partners in every sense of the word. What one lacked, the other provided. Where one was weak, the other was strong. On a spring morning in their 45th year of marriage, Quincy woke early and went out to watch the sunrise. It was something he still did when his body allowed, this greeting of the new day. Rebecca found him there on the porch, bundled in his old coat, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to rose. "Could not sleep?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him and pulling a quilt around her shoulders. "Slept fine. Just wanted to see the day come in. You know how I am." "I do." She reached over and took his hand. "Beautiful morning. Every morning is beautiful when you are here to share it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun crested the eastern hills and spilled gold light across the valley. The ranch was waking up around them. Thomas and his oldest son were heading toward the barn to start the morning chores. Smoke rose from the chimney of the cottage where Samuel lived with his family. A rooster crowed enthusiastically, greeting the day. 45 years, Rebecca said softly. "Can you believe it? I can and I cannot. Seems like a lifetime, seems like yesterday. We have been lucky, you and I, to have so many years together, to have built all of this." She gestured at the ranch spread before them, at the life they had created. "Not everyone gets this. No, they do not. We are blessed beyond measure." Quincy squeezed her hand gently. "I meant what I said on our first anniversary, and I will mean it on our 50th and beyond. You are the best decision I ever made. Bringing you home that night, making you my wife, building this life with you, best decisions of my life. And you are mine. My best decision, my greatest blessing, my truest love." The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, revealing the ranch in all its spring glory. The fields were greening, the trees budding, the creek running high and clear with snowmelt. Calves frolicked in the pasture and horses grazed peacefully in the morning light. It was a scene they had witnessed thousands of times, but it never grew old. Each spring was a miracle, a promise fulfilled, a covenant renewed. Each spring was proof that they had survived another winter, that they were still here, still together, still building and growing and loving. "You remember what they told you?" Quincy asked. "That first winter at the trading post, that I would not make it through. That I should prepare myself to die. And look at you now, 46 winters later, still here, still strong. Because of you," Rebecca said, "you made sure I saw the next spring and every spring after." "We made sure," Quincy corrected, "both of us together. You fought to live, and I fought to keep you alive, and we both won." Rebecca smiled, feeling the truth of it in her bones. They had both won in every way that mattered. They had won love and life and family and legacy. They had won years beyond counting and memories beyond measure. They had won each other, and that was the greatest victory of all. As the sun rose higher and the day properly began, they stood together and walked down the porch steps. Their steps were slower now than they once had been, their bodies marked by age and use. But they still walked hand in hand, still moved in harmony, still faced each new day as partners. The ranch spread before them, alive and thriving. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across it, each playing their part in keeping the legacy alive. The land they had poured their lives into was flourishing, green and rich and productive. "Another spring," Rebecca said, breathing in the sweet air. "Another spring," Quincy agreed. "Of many more to come, and there were many more springs. Years of them, each one precious, each one celebrated." They watched their grandchildren grow into adults and have children of their own. They saw the ranch continue to prosper and expand. They witnessed the Jordan Valley grow from a collection of scattered homesteads into a thriving community. Through it all, they remained the example everyone looked to. The couple who had beaten the odds, who had built something lasting from nothing, who had loved each other through every trial and triumph. Young couples would come to them for advice, and Quincy and Rebecca would share what they had learned over their decades together. "Choose kindness," Rebecca would say. "Even when you are angry or hurt, choose kindness. Choose partnership," Quincy would add. "You are a team, not adversaries. Work together always. Choose gratitude," they would say together. "Be grateful for what you have, for who you have. Never take each other for granted." Simple advice, but profound in its truth. And they lived it every single day, these two people who had found each other in a blizzard and had held on through everything that came after. When Quincy turned 80, the whole valley came out to celebrate. He was bent now, his hair white as snow, his hands gnarled with arthritis. But his eyes were still sharp, his mind still clear, and when he looked at Rebecca, there was still love shining in every glance. Rebecca, at 78, was still beautiful in the way that speaks of a life well lived. Her face was lined with laugh lines and sun-weathered, but her smile could still light up a room. Her hands, though marked with age spots and scars, were still capable, still gentle. They danced at the party, moving slowly around the floor to music played by their great-grandchildren. It was not the vigorous dancing of their youth, but it was no less heartfelt. They moved together as they had for more than half a century, in perfect harmony, in complete understanding. "Still got all my teeth," Quincy joked as the song ended. "And most of my hair, not bad for an old cowboy." "Still the handsomest man in the valley," Rebecca replied. "At least to me." That is all that matters then. They sat down together, watching their family celebrate around them. There were children everywhere, running and playing and filling the air with joyful noise. There were adults, their own children now gray-haired themselves, tending to the party with the same care and attention Rebecca and Quincy had always shown. "We did this," Rebecca said, wonder in her voice. "All of these people, they exist because we survived that winter. Because you rode out in a blizzard and brought me home. Because we loved each other and built a life together. This whole beautiful, chaotic, amazing family exists because of choices we made all those years ago." "That is a humbling thought," Quincy admitted, "and a proud one. Look at them all. Happy, healthy, loving each other. That is our real legacy, Rebecca. Not the ranch or the horses or any of that. Our legacy is this family we created, the love we passed down through the generations. I could not have asked for a better legacy, or a better life, or a better partner to share it all with." Quincy raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Nor could I, my love, nor could I." As twilight fell and the party moved from celebration to the quiet comfort of family being together, Quincy and Rebecca walked out to their beloved gazebo one more time. It had been rebuilt twice over the years, but it still stood in the same spot, still faced west toward the hills, still held cushions made from Catherine's quilt. They sat on the familiar bench, their bodies pressed close together for warmth and comfort. The stars were coming out, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of apple blossoms from the orchard Rebecca had planted 50 years before. "Thank you," Quincy said into the peaceful silence. "For what, my dear? For saying yes all those years ago. For choosing me, for choosing this life, for choosing every day to stay and build and love. Thank you for 45 years of happiness. Thank you for every spring we have seen together." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Thank you for making sure I lived to see them. They told me I would not survive that winter, but you made sure I did. You made sure I survived and thrived and lived a life beyond my wildest dreams. How could I ever thank you enough for that? You already have. Every day, in 1,000 small ways. You thank me by being my partner, my lover, my best friend. You thank me by giving me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You thanked me by making this house a home, by turning this ranch into a legacy, by loving me even when I was difficult or stubborn or set in my ways." He turned to face her, cupping her weathered face in his gnarled hands. "You thank me by being you, Rebecca. That is all I ever needed." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 50 years of devotion and would hold however many more they were granted. When they pulled apart, they remained close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. "I love you," Rebecca whispered. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond, if there is a beyond. I love you too, more than words can ever express. You are my heart, Rebecca. You always have been." They stayed in the gazebo until full dark, wrapped in quilts in each other, watching the stars wheel overhead. They did not speak much, having said all that needed saying. They simply existed together, two souls who had found their perfect match and had held on through every storm. When they finally made their way back to the house, moving slowly and carefully in the darkness, their family was still there. Thomas and his wife were cleaning up from the party. Catherine Rose was settling her youngest grandchildren down to sleep. Samuel was banking the fire. Martha, visiting from Portland with her family, was making tea. "There you are," Martha said with a smile. "We were beginning to think you had decided to sleep in the gazebo." "Not tonight," Quincy said, "though we have done that a time or two." "Many times," Rebecca corrected with a laugh. "Your father is quite fond of sleeping under the stars." They said good night to their family and made their way to their bedroom. It was the same room where Rebecca had first woken after Quincy brought her through the blizzard, though it had been expanded and improved over the years. The bed was the same, a sturdy frame Quincy had built himself in the early years of their marriage. As they prepared for sleep, moving through the familiar rituals of a long married couple, Rebecca felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was her life, and it was good. Better than good. It was wonderful and precious and exactly what she had always wanted. "What are you smiling about?" Quincy asked, catching her expression in the mirror. "Just thinking about how blessed I am, how blessed we are." "Every single day," he agreed. He climbed into bed and held out his arms. Rebecca went to him gladly, settling against his side as she had done for 50 years. They fit together perfectly, curves and angles matched through long practice. "Good night, my love," Quincy murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good night, my heart," Rebecca replied. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in their love, grateful for every moment they had been given. Outside, the spring night was alive with sound and scent and possibility. The ranch slept peacefully around them, protected and nurtured by the love that had built it. And in the morning, when the sun rose on another day, another spring, another chance to be together, Quincy and Rebecca would wake in each other's arms and begin again. They would face whatever came with the same partnership and devotion they had always shown. They would choose each other as they had chosen each other every day for half a century, because that was what love was. Not just the grand gestures or the dramatic rescues, though those had their place, but the daily choice to stay, to work together, to build something that would outlast them both. The choice to see beauty in ordinary moments, to find joy in simple pleasures, to weather storms knowing you were not alone. That was what Quincy and Rebecca had built in the end. Not just a ranch or a family, though both were substantial achievements. They had built a love that endured, that sustained, that transformed two lonely people into something greater than themselves. They had built a life worth living together. And every spring they saw was proof that love, when tended with care and patience and unwavering commitment, could survive anything. Even a winter that should have killed them both, but instead gave them everything they never knew they needed. They told her she would not make it through winter. But a cowboy made sure she saw every spring after. And oh, what beautiful springs they were.